it's largely taken the election of Donald Trump to confirm to me what I've been suspecting all along: a radicalization of young men, largely through the internet, largely through podcast culture. Quite recently, I've had a young man, and I'll use the word man broadly because he was a teen. He was still a boy in all intents and purposes. He then tried to regale me on what it means to be a man. Don't be a golden retriever, Lester. You must be a wolf. What does that mean? A golden retriever in internet parlance is a partner who is somewhat codependent. A male partner who's codependent on the woman partner. But don't be a golden retriever, Lester. Be a wolf. I was, where do you get this? No, it's on the podcast. Andrew Tate is talking about it. It's Jordan Peterson's version of philosophy. And then I also wade into the murky world of the pod bros. It is the Joe Rogans, and I take Joe Rogan with a pinch of salt. He gets good guests, some guests that I actually enjoy listening to, like Neil deGrasse Tyson. But then I also would have to sit through 3 hours of Joe Rogan's worldview, and he's entitled to his worldview. But what is the impact on their opinions on boys, on young men? Now, Donald Trump won this American election by doing one thing. Firstly, he didn't just target white young men. He targeted men in general. It's sort of the end of identity politics when it comes to machismo, when it comes to what's known as the manosphere. We don't care if the man is black, Latina, Hispanic, or a Anglo-Saxon white American male. They're young men, they're boys, they're influenced by crypto, they're influenced by MMA, they're influenced by gaming and streaming, and they're influenced by the podcasts they listen to. And in fact, Charlie Kirk, who is a right-wing figure in American podcast broadcasting, he actually, this is what was his admission in how Donald Trump capitalized on a radicalized young man in the U.S. Take a listen.
And Donald Trump's campaign strategy, of which we helped execute on the ground in some of these states, was that, guys, don't spend your time knocking on doors about a suburban soccer mom who's weighing her options. Instead, because that takes 9 contacts to try to get her. 9 points of contact on average. Conversations, discussions, and they could be 30 minutes on it. Instead, turning point, go spend your time in very Republican areas where there are non-registered or what we call disengaged voters. People that like Trump, like his worldview. For example, the bro vote, right? And so this is where we spent our time, and we harvested, not ballot harvested, but we harvested in a very, very powerful way. At Arizona State University, for example, we registered thousands of young men to vote in fraternities. So what Donald Trump's campaign did is they hacked the 2024 election, not in a way that people would think, where they said, wait a second, everyone has a supercomputer in the right-hand pocket. Why are we worried about what CNN is saying or MSNBC is saying? Why don't we win the information war? And then finally, the kicker, they said, why don't we go on the most ambitious, over-the-top, low-propensity voter communication strategy on Theo Von, Joe Rogan, Nelk Boys, Logan Paul, influencer strategies, right? And so what they said is there's this whole reservoir.
Freaking brilliant.
And the final kicker, my mandate at Turning Point was very simple. Charlie, turn Trump supporters into voters.
And it's not benign. It's not benign at all, because immediately after Donald Trump was elected, you had these pod boys go on here and say, we won. We have finally won something. Nick Fuentes is also a podcaster. He went on here and said this.
The feel when you're totally not pressed. The feel when we control your bodies. Hey, bitch, we control your bodies. Guess what? Guys win again, okay? Men win again. And yes, we control your bodies. Hi, I'm your Republican congressman. Hi, I'm your Republican congressman. It's your body, my choice.
It's, of course, the backlash to what a Democratic Party ran as on a ticket of reproductive health. Darren Camphor is an entrepreneur, content creator. I value his opinion on socioeconomics. Dan Cord is a broadcaster, social commentator. Hopefully, we'll be joined by William Bird in the next while. Darren, your thoughts just on not on the last few weeks of American election, but what I have noticed. I'm sure you have also noticed this change in tone, this change in rhetoric, and this radicalization of rhetoric on particularly the platforms where young men consume their media.
I think what's most concerning for me is that a lot of the discussion that happens in a room full of men create and formulate opinions on women and how to engage with women and how to interact with women and how to, as Nick Fuentes said, control women. And so something that's posed to men as a healthy discussion among each other around their mental health or how to navigate themselves in society is most of the time centered around how to control, navigate, engage with women without any woman in the room. And so you have this marginalization that comes from this conversation and often very violent, damaging opinions because women aren't there to get involved in those opinions very often.
Dan, a listener says, I'd also like to add that the radicalization of young men is subjective and needs to be seen in the context of the radicalization of the left. But if a Nick Fuentes says, I control your body now, woman, there's nothing subjective about that. That is pure, we are backlashing against where we feel we have been marginalized, that our opinions don't matter, and maybe even an ideology that says women are in fact lesser than us men, us boys, and we're trying to control the space.
Yeah, I was incredibly amused and saddened, but amused by that young man who said to you, how dare you be a golden retriever? Because what that really means is somebody who loves and appreciates their partner. and on the other hand, a lot of the mythos around being a big man is like fundamentally like silly. Like, what I love in an ironic way almost the most is the fact that there is no such thing as a lone wolf or an alpha wolf. That came from one study over 100 years ago that was misreported. And so the fundamental mythos about being a lone wolf and so perfect and being a wolf that Andrew Tate then peddle is like factually unfounded and off of a misreport. Like even the fundamental notion of being a more right-wing kind of dominant person doesn't come from any grounding in like inspirational or like inspiration in reality. But to the person from your WhatsApp line, I just also find it amusing in this moment because being radically left is about freedom. It's about giving people exactly the space to be who they are themselves. Whereas being radically right is more and more about enforcing patriarchy, reinstilling misogyny, reinstilling hierarchical society and telling women that this is their place and men this is their place. And if as a man you don't agree with this, then we're going to feminize, mock and belittle you almost as a woman because you're not towing the party line of being a good man.
Is this a backlash to a Me Too movement, to a sexual and sexuality freedom in women over the last 8-10 years, particularly young women, saying you can be positive about your sexuality, you can be positive in who you choose to be around? And that has created this phenomena of incels. It's men who don't date, who don't have any sexual engagement, feel that they have an axe to grind because women simply don't want to be with us. And it's not just in the United States. We also see that here in South Africa as well, Darren.
I wouldn't maybe use the term backlash. I would maybe the term rebellion or highlighting of. So when any kind of system of equality faces aggression, or you face some kind of push in the other direction, it doesn't then create an incel group. They were always there. They just become louder because now they have to be more vocal about what they are trying to say. The same way when you fight against racism, racists start coming out and trying to enforce or create more racist stereotypes and to enforce more racism. So I think it's a good thing for us as a society to have these kind of things highlighted because they've always been there. And what's happening now is that women are trying to push against patriarchy and misogyny and everything else. And so men are coming out and now trying to reinforce a system that's beneficial to them. And so I don't think we should think that a Me Too movement is what resulted in an incel community, but rather that a Me Too movement of women saying that they're not going to be quiet about what they've experienced has now resulted in men saying, well, actually, we would prefer that you not talk about it.
Let me go to William Birdner. He's the head of media monitoring Africa. I don't know how you measure the engagement, particularly the engagement of violent rhetoric or hurtful rhetoric, William. But I want to ask anecdotally, have you seen a change in tone in the conversation, particularly on sites like Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, where since the sale to Elon Musk, unless I have a curated section on my Twitter account, what I'm being fed is largely conspiracy theories. It's largely hateful rhetoric. It's largely something that I don't want to be around, but because I use social media, I see a lot of it. Generally in media, is there something that you are noticing?
Good morning. Yeah, there's no doubt, especially a platform like X, which is probably more appropriate to be calling it 4X these days, just because of how dreadful it is, and the kind of cesspit of vile and really awful kind of commentary that it's being filled with, and its owner, Elon Musk, has made no bones about how he's trying to drive his particular platform, actively spreading mis and disinformation in the lead up to the US election, and then re-platforming people and despicable people like Andrew Tate. And it's not just that he's re-platformed them, it's that they are making money from this. And this is something that I think is probably one of the more repugnant elements of it. The way that the social media platforms are being engineered now actively facilitates the rise of these particularly toxic versions of masculinity. It generates audience, it generates conversation. Andrew Tate makes comments that are deeply and profoundly misogynist, and he makes money from them. And I think that we really have to say there's something fundamentally wrong with a system that actively rewards people undermining others' basic rights. So it's not about a thing of having a different view, or even a view of being a patriarchal male. When you talk about women shouldn't have the right to choose what to do with their bodies, when you talk about women shouldn't have the right to vote, these are fundamental issues that speak to basic ideas of equality. These aren't things that are just having a different view of, are you a Labrador or are you a lone wolf? It's just ridiculous as those sort of concepts are in relation to these things. But these are issues that deeply undermine our very basis and structure as a society. And what we've seen over the last sort of certainly since Elon Musk on X particularly, and then it's been kind of mirrored to varying degrees in other platforms, is this very clear and deliberate shift to actively promote these kinds of voices. So we probably think that they're a lot bigger than they may well be, because of the fact that they're there, and because of the fact that when they do then respond vilely to almost anything, you'll see that. So if you saw something, the South African Human Rights Commission put out a post about the old South African flag, and the kind of response from the group of people that ganged up in response to that was coming from this same group of people. So it's not just linked to toxic masculinity, it's linked then very much to ideas of, like Make America Great Again, this idea that we need to go back to when things were somehow better. And, better for who? Better for a tiny, in South Africa, a tiny group of white people.
Let me go to Brian in Milnerton. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning. I found it fascinating that this discussion started with someone saying that you should be a golden Labrador and move to right-wing politics in America. That person is not reflective of society. It's certainly not reflective of Republicans in America. I'm not sure where it's coming from.
It's coming from the same podcast that young men in South Africa listen to. It's the same podcast that was used by Donald Trump to activate his campaign.
And the left wing, the Young Turks, or the other left-wing podcasts that are as radicalized and fundamentalized with their issues that they push with an enormous amount of energy and pushing people to stand up against men, for example.
So what is the
taking away
evidence?
men's rights.
What is the evidence?
Yes.
What evidence that is the opposite of "I control your body"? Have you heard coming from left-wing podcasts? What have left-wing podcasts said similar to "I control your body, my choice"?
That within a relationship, that there is no choice that anyone has, that the husband has, that the boyfriend has, does not participate at all, whether he has ultimate choice or not. There is no partnership. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that the left wing, whether I believe in God's not really relevant, but they are ferociously against any kind of opinion that suggests there's anything else outside of their own.
So this seems, Darren, thanks, Brian, we're running out of time, but this seems, what Brian is saying is that men feel excluded. There is a changing system, and we noted here in South Africa that the economic breadwinners in South Africa, particularly in the most vulnerable of groups, are women. Women, and rightfully so, are more likely to have access to social security in the form of grants, where men would have to stand on the side of the road and wait for piecemeal jobs. I completely understand how this could emasculate a man. But that's what Brian is saying, that men in relationships feel emasculated, their roles have changed, and therefore there's finally people who are talking like them and, most importantly, listening to them. Darren?
But my question to him would, why does that feel emasculating to men when women have experienced that for centuries? It's because men have not had to experience this, and so now that we are getting the hint of any kind of socio-economic equality between men and women, they don't know how to handle it. They don't know how to handle not being the economic breadwinner in the house, and they don't know how to handle not having the final say be their word. And so now they're having to negotiate and restructure partnerships with women, and they might not like that. And if they have a problem with that, that's fine. They must just date each other. But in the 21st century, they're going to have to see women as equals and structure the relationships the way they would like to as a partnership.
We're not just seeing a radicalization in gender politics, in xenophobia, in race-based politics. Dan, we are in a country that I think we have politicians with no real politics, but are pandering to the straw men of, it's not your fault, the problem's in South Africa, it's because of women who are now buying more property than men, it's because of undocumented migrants who are coming into this country and taking your jobs. That is the challenge, and that is the danger in a South African context if we go closer to a 2026 local government elections, 2029 general elections.
I think it's important to remember that any time that a politician complains about a group of people, it's a misdirect. It is making people care about that thing instead of the failings of a system, of a society that doesn't give opportunities, or a society that doesn't allow people genuine ability to advance themselves. In America, the project of making men panic about gender politics is to misdirect them from the fact that if you're working class in America, Donald Trump is going to give you higher taxes and more expensive food to eat because of tariffs, while giving tax breaks for the wealthy like himself. It's class warfare. And the project of making men care more about whether or not they're still big men, like in Mad Men, like in Marlon Brando films, is to make them think about that and believe that the real problem is women, and not the fact that the American social order, the American social system has failed working class men and not given them opportunities to get educated, to make money, to have the dream, the American dream, the lives for themselves. And very, very, very similarly in South Africa, every single time a political party or an individual fails in their job as a politician, fails to provide service delivery, fails to provide security on streets, fails to provide a decent home for people, fails to provide a decent clinic for people, fails to provide social grants for people, fails to provide a school where their children can learn, they find somebody else to blame. It's a bait and switch distraction strategy that politicians have used since the beginning of politics. The second that Gayton McKenzie is in trouble about the Jocelyn Smith Foundation, he's talking about foreigners again. all the foreigners coming over the border, it's a bait and switch to make people care about something else, to look away from the failings of politicians.
William, talk to me about the financial models of broadcasting and media. I work in a commercial environment. I know that our rate card, which our salespeople gives to our advertisers, has to be based on something, and that's the amount of listeners we have. You raise an issue of the commercialization of these podcasts. They're not necessarily selling their conversation. They're selling this energy drink that just happens to be on the table, that just happens every time the camera is on me, I'm taking a sip. It's how the new defense secretary in the United States, he has a podcast, but he also sells AK-47 bullets, because that's what he's actually selling. It's not about the actual message. It's about selling product.
Yeah, so I think that there's a key difference between broadcasters and, of course, the social media models for making money. Broadcasters are licensed. You've got to adhere, and everyone hears the message whenever they listen. You subscribe to the BCCSA if you have a problem with anything we say. So if you go and cross any number of lines, if you were to say the kinds of things that Andrew Tate were to be saying on your show, you'd be before the BCCSA before you could say, my name's Lester Kibbett, right? You'd be in a huge amount of trouble, and rightly so, because that's why you have a code of conduct and generally agreed principles and rules. It doesn't mean it unduly limits your right to freedom of expression in no way at all, right? And that's a very different model from what we're seeing that is there for the social media entities. They drive their and derive their models from selling your data and from making sure that they keep you on their platforms and ensuring that there's engagement. And what they know is engagement thrives on things that make people angry, on things that make people want to shout about things and engage, and things that make them fearful. And their model very much rewards those that drive that kind of content. It's not surprising then that Andrew Tate, as an easy example, is making money from these things. And so you're actively incentivizing him to be even more of a doorknob than he already is. And that's where there's a real problem, because you've got a social media platform that's operating within theoretically the same societal rules that all of us are, and yet they clearly aren't, because they're actively funding and inciting the kinds of speech and the kinds of ideas that are deeply destructive to any basic society other than a fascist one. If you want to go and live in a fascist state, that's fine. But if you want to believe that there's a democracy, then then you have to accept a freedom of expression. Fascism doesn't accept freedom of expression.
Sorry, just one more thing to add to this conversation. I just think that men listening to, specifically white men listening to these podcasts, have somehow got it, just like your caller, have somehow got it into their heads that for some reason they are the marginalized group, that they are the attacked group. And, it's just ludicrous. It really is just ludicrous. I mean, these people are people that have been the oppressor, that have been the most dominant group in the history of society. And so to now flip that because women are saying, hey, we don't want to take on all the workload, because now not only are we expected to work in a working environment, which obviously some of us want to do and some of us don't want to do, but now we're also expected to take on the entire load of being a mom, of being a wife, of being a homemaker, and do all of that while the husband, in a heteronormative relationship, can be at home and just go to work, come home, and everything's expected to be done for them. And as women, now that we're saying, actually, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to live like that. I don't want to have kids. Now it's being touted as we're attacking men. Men are suddenly becoming this, group of just oppressed, marginalized people, which is just ridiculous. It really is.
But Darren, it's not just white men. And I also say this, that I respect and appreciate, in fact, many of my black friends who may not have the same financial philosophy as mine, economic philosophy as mine, even social policy as mine. I, in fact, appreciate that I can say my black African friend who is in fact quite socially conservative, is in fact even neoliberal, I can say, well, that's your agency and allow you to have that opinion. But what Donald Trump did manage to do, he says, I'm throwing out the identity politics in this election. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, or Hispanic and Latina, or Asian. We're targeting you because you are a man. What does that say about the end of identity politics based on race and more on gender politics?
I mean, I think that's what you do when you want to win more votes. I don't necessarily think he actually subscribes to that ideology, but I think it's a better strategy than just targeting specifically white men when you're trying to win an election. But when it comes to identity politics, the more you can align a certain group on a certain topic, the better it is for you. And so it's not surprising that we see that, especially in a country like South Africa, where only a very small group of people are actually white men. Patriarchy and misogyny is unfortunately carried out through other racial groups as well, not just white men. And so it needs to be addressed there too.
Dan?
Yeah. I mean, I concur with Darren. If you want to win an election, you talk to as many people as possible. But something else that I've been thinking about deeply, as we have seen the shift to the right in American politics, and we know the cultural hegemony that America has over at least the English-speaking Western world, what happens in America affects and sways the opinions of people in other parts of the world, is the fact that there has been an enormous amount of private money spent on these podcast bros. An enormous amount of right-wing funding has gone into them because for these very, very wealthy right-wing donors, the great threat to their wealth is leftist policies winning the day. Because then you have wealth taxes, then you have redistribution, then you have attempts by governments to redistribute wealth and to help poorer and working class people. And so their strategy is to fund the hell out of the right-wing podcast bros so that they can continue the idea of, it's the American dream and you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And if you're a real man, then you have your wife being doting upon you and loving you and making you babies while you go home and bring home the bacon yourself. And social grants are bad and you shouldn't have a social grant. And the really good people don't use social grants and they build their own lives for themselves. Because if that politics wins the day, then the wealthy who are funding these podcast bros and weaponizing ideas of manhood get away with a hyper-capitalist society that allows them to continue unregulated, untaxed, and making all of the money as they do. There's a huge strategy here, and I saw somebody tweeting about how hard it is to be a leftist podcaster because you just have to crowdfund. No rich people are giving you money to tell everybody to tax the rich more. It's like antithetical to their position. And so I think we need to see the deeper machinations of the hyper wealthy to skew the masses politics towards free market position, lack of regulation, and lack of taxation of the wealthy.
Another voice note?
Hi, Lester. I am really enjoying this discussion that you guys are having. If you want to see a localized radicalization of a person, look no further than Gareth Cliff. Just look at all his socials. He went from being this fairly liberal, open-minded individual to retweeting Trump and just being completely radical about his views, not only about local politics, but in general and also about women. If you really want to just have a quick look at complete radicalization, just search Gareth Cliff's social.
Quite a few messages is to the effect of cry some more from men who I think have drunk the Kool-Aid. At the same time, I appreciate the diversity of platforms. That's the beauty of the internet. It's a democratic space. The rubbish thing about the internet is that it is a democratic space. Because as William said, something that I say on a commercial radio station or that is regulated by a BCCSA, not the same applies when it is on the internet. But when it comes to as you say, the production of podcasts and material, people could say, but you also pander, Dan, you also pander for the clicks. Everything is about monetization. The more shares and likes and even the rage comments, rage bait is also a thing where I'm going to say something that's deliberately out there so that you can respond. Isn't that the tactic that you also use?
That is a fair point, but the conclusion of that is, oh, so nobody should say anything online. Like, that is the logical outcome of that argument. Whereas I personally believe that it is possible to spot who is trying to, do work that resonates with people from a sincere place and not just use it as money grubbing. I mean, your example earlier about somebody who suddenly has an AK-47 being sold after raging about why Donald Trump has saved the world reminds me of Alex Jones in InfoWars. Like, his extraordinary ability to talk about big topics and then give you a protein shake to say this will make you feel more about this big topic. It's actually quite easy to see how people are trying to make money and what is the real focus and purpose of what they're doing. I was talking with some of my podcast listeners the other day about the fact that we don't spend a lot of time on the podcast talking about lots of violent crime. Not because it's not important, but because that's just not the space that we've made for ourselves. Whereas we all know in newscasting that if it bleeds, it leads. And so the best way to get as many clicks as possible is to talk as much as possible about awful, terrible, violent crime. And all these different types of broadcasters and content creators are making decisions all the time about what is their thing. And if you want to go and get the most clicks, you can talk about violent crime. But if you choose not to, then already someone has made a decision to not try and exploit for the most number of clicks.
Dani says, although I'm on the side of equality, I can see how constant messages of how bad a group is or was, or how privileged you as a group is, how toxic your masculinity is, how that can create fertile ground for resentment of an individual if an individual struggles to get work because he is a man, etc. There's a saying, if you criticize me all the time, do not be surprised if I do not support you. Darren?
I've said it on social media, and I'll say it again. Men are the white people of the gender spectrum. When men have to take accountability for their role in inequality with regards to gender, they react the same way white people respond when they need to take accountability for racism. They don't take any. They redirect and they misdirect and they complain and they pretend they are victimized instead of looking inward and looking at the actual group that they are doing damage to. And then they would rather blame that group than look at themselves and try and see how they can make it better.
Dan, over the course of a Me Too movement, I think it was very important that myself and friends of mine, we had sober conversations. This was very important. And we acknowledge, yes, we are not perfect and we're not trying to be virtue signalers here, but I've been through a process where I thought, that relationship that I had, that interaction that I had, was it appropriate? There was this great an inflection point about 8-10 years ago, I think for many men. But have we built on possibly that groundwork of allowing women to have the agency over their bodies, having women decide who they want to spend their time with? Or have we regressed? Are fewer, particularly younger men, seeing that moment in how we see gender and sexual equality?
Well, I think that the kind of inflection point hasn't happened for these young men yet, right? So young men, through the overwhelming excesses of the internet, are being put through, in my opinion, far more profound misogyny school than most young men before the ubiquity of the internet went through. Because think about it, like before, being able to turn on your phone and read 10,000 men being awful to women in an extreme way. When I was growing up, you just knew far fewer people. You saw far fewer behaviors and you experienced far fewer opinions. And so the thing for me is more like these young men need to have their inflection points that you were describing earlier, but the inflection point feels far more unlikely for them now to ever happen, or to happen in a really significant way where they relearn and unlearn what they were raised on and indoctrinated into, because the indoctrination school is so much more comprehensive and effective than anything that's come before.
Because we don't read.
Yes.
Because we don't read. And the demise and the shift in how we consume media, Darren, is I'm a child of the 80s, raised in the 90s. I enjoyed public access TV, children's media, which was at the time, 1994, 1995, was rights-based. I enjoyed watching Sesame Street and shows of where kids get together and they solve problems. We don't have that now because we have very little quality public interest TV and media, and everything's downloadable, everything's streamable, and everything is a 3-hour male fest talking about how much they love MMA. Nothing wrong with MMA, but I think that's the vehicle in how they transmit messages. Darren?
Yeah, I think we were just a minute ago talking about how I was live with an individual who had accused a gender-based violence organization of not actually doing what they were doing. And when I asked him just basic questions about what he knew about the organization, he actually knew nothing about it after having had several videos demeaning them and telling them that they were fake. And so I think because of how information is packaged, there's sometimes less pressure to have those discussions or to even just do some reading into what you were talking about, because you can just ramble on.
Just my final question to you in response to Andrew. Why are young men today culpable for the actions of every man who came before them, while everyone else is given a free pass for the actions they make today?
What? I'm so sorry. I don't know if that's a disrespectful way to respond to that question. Of course, men aren't responsible for every bad thing a man has ever done. What you're responsible for is that you were raised in a society of patriarchy where you were taught that you were better than women by virtue of being a man, and it is your job and your responsibility to unlearn those behaviors and every single day wake up and make sure that you are being the best man that you can be, and to be the best man that you can be, it means being decent to everybody, including women. Well, is that a fair response? I'm sorry. There was just something in me about that question.